Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event. As you all know, today is a momentous day for Tunisia. 10 years ago today, the Tunisian people succeeded in removing from power dictator Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali. When Ben Ali fled, he opened the door for a democratic transition that is still unfolding today. The Tunisian uprisings, which began with the self-immolation of Mohamed Bouazizi on December 17, 2010, also set off a series of mass protests across the Middle East and North Africa, commonly known as the Arab Spring. But today, Tunisia stands as the only democracy in the region, a country that faces challenges, particularly in the economic sphere, but which also has achieved many successes, from drafting a new democratic constitution to creating and protecting the space for freedom of expression and a vibrant civil society and free media, to serving as a beacon of hope for people across the region. So I want to start off by, first of all, congratulating Tunisia and all Tunisians on this incredible feat. And I know this comes as a strange time when the country simultaneously is going under lockdown today due to coronavirus. So I hope that you can celebrate, even if it's in your own homes. But we are thrilled today to be joined by an incredible panel of Tunisian activists and experts to tell us about their experience during the revolution and where things need to go to keep the transition on track for the next decade and beyond. We are going to start this morning with a panel, which I will moderate shortly, and that's going to be followed by the premiere of a video that I'm very excited to share with all of you, which captures the experiences of Tunisians from across the country during the revolution and beyond. And we will then shift to a fireside chat conducted by POMED's Amy Hawthorne with Ambassador Gordon Gray, who has served as US Ambassador to Tunis during the revolution and had a front row seat to the events unfolding then. Before we get started, let me just let you know how you can all participate and ask questions of our panelists. There are two methods for this. The first is through Zoom's Q&A feature, and the second is by emailing your questions to communications@pomed.org. And please feel free to send your questions during any part of the discussion, and we will get to as many as we can later on. So let me introduce our panelists and begin with our panel. Our first panelist is Achraf Aouadi, who's a Tunisian activist and the founder of iWatch, a watchdog anti-corruption organization that was founded after the 2011 revolution. iWatch works to organize and advocate for increased government transparency and fights against corruption. Mr. Aouadi was chosen to represent the Tunisian civil society at the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and also serves as an Ashoka Fellow. Amna Guellali is Amnesty International's Deputy Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa. Previously, she was a senior Tunisia and Algeria researcher at Human Rights Watch, where she investigated human rights abuses in both countries. Before joining Human Rights Watch, Guellali worked as an analyst at the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court at The Hague and as a senior researcher at the Department of International Law at the Asser Institute. She has also served as legal officer at the regional delegation of the International Committee of the Red Cross in Tunis. She holds a PhD from the European University Institute in Florence. Saida Ounissi is a member of the Assembly of the Representatives of the People from the Ennahda Party. She represents the constituency of France Nord. And when she was first elected to parliament in 2014, she was the youngest Ennahda candidate and became one of the youngest members of parliament. She sat on the committees of Finance, Planning and Development, and of Martyrs and Wounded of the Revolution. Previously, she worked as an intern at the African Development Bank and was also previously a researcher at the Research Institute on the Contemporary Maghreb. So let me begin by asking each of you a relatively easy question, which is, where were you during the revolution? And let me start with Amna.
Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here and to participate in this event, which gives us an opportunity to celebrate the Tunisia revolution in a time of a lockdown when we are almost really physically unable to celebrate such a great and important, date, such a symbolic date in the history of Tunisia. And so to answer your question, at the time of the revolution, I was living in The Hague and working at the International Criminal Court, at the Office of the Prosecutor, working there as an analyst. I started working there in 2008 and was living abroad for a long time. so living outside of Tunisia for more than 10 years when the revolution broke out. I came back to Tunis at the time for holidays, and I remember very distinctly when I was on the plane coming back to the country, reading, like the kind of regime newspapers, so the newspapers that were all about propaganda for Ben Ali, and they were speaking about this something that happened in Sidi Bouzid, a vendor setting himself on fire, and there were some protests. They were saying this, but then were not. They considered that these protests were just marginal and were not, important, and the entire, media at the time was just, downplaying what was happening. And so I spent 2 weeks in Tunisia, had to go back to The Hague before the end of the uprising, so before the fall of the regime, before the 14th of January. But during the time I was in Tunisia, I really felt that something very strong was happening. The stream of the protests, the steadfast way in which the activists and leaders not leaders of the protest, because at the time there was no leaders, but like people who went on the streets, there was a real desire for change and a real thrust for a movement that would be, will put Tunisia on a different path than the path of dictatorship. And yes, and when the 14th of January, happened, I was in The Hague, but I was following everything that was happening and was very frustrated not to be in my home country when all of this was happening. And thus I decided to come back to Tunisia no matter what. And yeah, I came back few months later and started participating in the transition process by joining an international human rights organization, Human Rights Watch. That's it.
Thank you. And to you, Achraf, where were you during the revolution?
So I was in Tunisia. I would say I was fortunate enough to be in the country, and it was I think a weird month of December. I remember the debate at the time was there was a big scandal between a Tunisian rapper and a Tunisian actor, and at the time that was the conversation, and then things broke out, and then there was not much coverage at first. There was just someone who set himself on fire, and then gradually the news, of course, they did not cover it. So at the time, I remember trying to find a reliable source of news, and it was really slow. It was really slow because the capital is always the last thing that's hit by anything. So I remember it was Sidi Bouzid, but somehow the regime managed to cover or give their version of the story, and then things started shaking a little bit more in Qasrin, and that's when people started believing them. But I remember that was on the 31st. There was two Tunisias actually. Tunisia that was celebrating the new year. It's not even aware what's going on. Another Tunisia has been shot alive by the police. So it was really weird. And then I remember I would try and gather few the news and then share it on Facebook. But the one serious thing that happened, to be honest, was maybe starting from the 10th when the GTT had their general strike in Sfax. But for me, the moment I felt that the regime was weak, when they started shooting at people in Tela. So there was a need for blood donation for the hospital in Tela and Qasrin. So with my friends, we organized a small campaign actually to collect blood, and we organized it in Géant, which is at the time the biggest mall in Tunisia. And then we're afraid what's going to happen, but nothing really happened. So for me, that was around the 11th, I think. So when that happened, like when we managed to get the campaign and then gather donors and then being able to send the blood to the hospital in Tela, at the time I felt that the regime is weak. Something like this would never happen, because this is first acknowledging that they shot at protesters. Second, this is somehow a blood you're giving to the people who are anti-regime. So the fact that we managed to get away with it at the time, because it was big actually, and we were telling people this is blood that's going to be gone to Tela. So for me, that was the first time I felt like, yeah, a revolution. Not really. I was optimistic. So that the regime would change. So I don't know. Like for me, it was interesting days, but I never saw it coming. And I never imagined that someone as bloody as Ben Ali would just leave. That's it. But at the same, I would say like it was a weird month of December, a weird month of January, when Facebook was all about big fights between people, like rappers making songs, and it was really a weird month, I remember. And then there was, of course, the famous battle between police and football supporters. I remember there was one of the I don't know whether the 12th or the 13th, there was a big game between two big clubs. There was Esperance playing L'Étoile. So this is a huge rivalry for years. And that day, Esperance was humiliated. Like they lost like 5-0, something like that. So the ultras and the supporters after the game, they started really fighting with the police, which happens all the time. But that was a turning point for me, because this is the time when you feel like the police are just, they're stepping back more. So there's so many fronts on social media. There isn't a front. Bloggers start going down to the south and feeding people with footage. At the same time, the supporters of footballs, they started gathering against the police in all over the country. So it was, as I said, a weird month, and all of that culminated to a day of the 14th of January.
Thank you. And to you, Saida, where were you during the revolution? Sorry, I think you're muted. If you could unmute.
Okay, so we're back. Hi, everyone. Very, very glad to be here. I said, Amna, it's actually a great occasion to go back on what happened 10 years ago and to kind of celebrating the revolution altogether. I was at that time in Paris. I was still doing my master's, and I was part of, at that time, very active Tunisian community who were demonstrating every evening after work or university and gathering. So the 14th of January, we were demonstrating in La Couronne, which is basically the Tunisian hood, if I can say, in Paris. And this is actually that was the place where we learned about Ben Ali fleeing the country.
This is great. These are really, really different experiences that you've all had. And so the next question I wanted to ask you, and I'll actually start with you, Saida, on this one, is, has the revolution been a success? And if not, what needs to be done to make it a success? How do you actually move the country in the direction that the revolution was aiming for?
I think most of the people agree on the fact that the revolution has been a success on some particular things, as freedom of speech, for example, the slowly but happening democratization of political institutions, for example, on again the pluralism, diversity of the political spectrum, but definitely a challenge still very much on social equity, social justice, the economy development, democratization of the economic sector, for example. So I would say that this is my take on this very kind of big question in a very few time.
Thank you. And to you, Amna, do you think the revolution has been a success? And if not, what needs to be done to make it a success?
The revolution itself was a success by the very fact that Ben Ali was ousted. It was such an incredibly such an incredible event to live through for a nation like Tunisia. What was less successful was the democratic transition, in the sense that the democratic transition started off very well. It started off by laying the foundations for a new system of governance. It started off by, agreeing on a path toward democracy, which was in the beginning, bringing together a national constituent assembly that was like really a founding moment in the democratic process, whereby all the political actors, civil society actors, kind of agreed on the need for setting, the building blocks for a new system through a new constitution. And so there was like a very broad and shared agreement in Tunisia on the form that the democratic transition should take. Whereby, we had like the elections for the National Constituent Assembly, then a lot of debates on the new constitution. There were tensions during those moments in terms of, the political opposition having such tense moments because also of the assassinations that happened in Tunisia in 2013. But still, there was kind of a consensus on what the path should be and what kind of constitution we should have. We had the constitution at the end adopted in January 2014, which we believed will really help Tunisia consolidate the democracy and start afresh with a clean slate from the past. And so there was like this, I think from 2011 until 2014, beginning of 2015, there was this, broad shared consensus on the form of the democratic process. From 2015 until maybe 2019, this has started shifting a little bit, in the sense that we went through a moment where the former regime figures came back, slowly into the fora, and there was a kind of not backsliding, but a belief that even though the new constitution and the democratic process were on from a procedural point of view were going in the right direction, there was also all kind of different, new political actors that prompted also some backsliding, like, for example, on the transitional justice process, for example, on different things that were stalling also during this transition. And I think now from 2019 onwards, until today, and today is really maybe like symbolically speaking in terms of the fact that we are under a lockdown, but it's not only a health lockdown, it's a kind of a political lockdown, really, because the very fact that the authorities have decided to put the country between the 14th of January till the 18th of January into a lockdown, it says a lot about like the political situation right now in Tunisia, which is, I said earlier on that starting in 2014, there was like the return of the old regime figures, but now it's kind of a full, like return of these figures. And like the sense in Tunisia is one of despair, and is one of like the political system. The agreement on the political system does not exist anymore. The agreement around the democratic process does not exist anymore, and we are seeing like the situation being blocked totally. Like, for example, if you watch what is happening inside the parliament today, you would see that we are in a kind of a lockdown in terms of very difficult to open up for initiatives, very difficult to move towards the consolidation of democracy. We don't have a constitutional court yet. We don't have, reforms that are so much needed yet. So that's my, I try to explain the different phases. I think also what happened is that because it was about giving a new foundation to the society, to the social contract. We spent a lot of time discussing ideological issues around identity, issues around, like the form of the state, like what state do we need, what state do we have, and what are the features of this new social contract, with people who are on the side of on the conservative side and others on the more progressive side. And we lost sight, I think, of the more, important, the very reasons why the people in Tunisia rose against the regime, which is, of course, more, linked to also economic and social rights. And so now we are in a situation where this kind of oblivion of the, like the more social demands is coming back to haunt us, in the sense that there is with the total blockage of the political, actors, we are facing, a real difficult economic situation, and people are really in Tunisia, I think today, despite all the, like the progress on the political side, we are facing a very difficult economic situation, and economic and social rights were absolutely not addressed so far.
Thank you. And to you, Achraf, has the revolution been a success? And if not, what needs to be done to make it a success?
I don't know, like, it depends how you look at it. On a macro level, obviously, it sounds and looks like a success, especially if you look at it from DC. So it's like, it's a democracy, you have periodical elections, you have civil society, the vibrant scene of civil society, you got plurality in the political scene. So if you see it as like the macro indicators, as I said, it's awesome. But if we look and dig deeper into the micro indicators, I think torture is still there, police brutality is still there. There are still people who die in detention. Still, the judiciary is not fully independent. So that's why, for me, it's a process that did not end yet, and we need to invest more in it. I think we failed in two things. First one is in managing people's expectations. I think we were not honest with the Tunisian people, especially in 2011 and 12, because we just kept on throwing dreams and hopes. And then a revolution comes already with a lot of expectations, with high hope. And then politicians, they just kept on feeding into that hope. And then you got a lot of hopes. At the same time, you got a very challenging economic situation, especially for the Tunisian economy. It's based on tourism. And then, of course, you lost a lot of a lot of money. The value of our currency is going down. So all that created more issues. So of course you got high hopes, high expectations. The economic situation doesn't follow, and then you got people who got more and more disappointed. And I don't know, like the elections were those doses of hope that they happen to the Tunisian people every 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. But at the same time, they leave a lot of kind of a bitter taste up to them, because you dream a lot. Yeah, now we're gonna have a new president that is not corrupt. Now we ended the transition. Now we have a new constitution. But each time, I think we try to find a reason to believe in democracy and in the revolution. But I think the second area we failed in is, it's not like we failed, but rather we're betrayed by our own political elites. You got people who are very different, that keep throwing hopes and dreams, and they keep promising things, but when they rule together in a way that does not necessarily serve the revolution. Yeah, the same political elite, the same economic elite, and they found a way to survive together. And that's why you see that in terms of taxation on companies, it's going really, really down since 2011. We're taxing less companies, we're taxing less the businessmen. We failed massively in our transitional justice. Unfortunately, it could have been an opportunity for us to turn the page and start a new chapter. But these small failures that we don't see or we don't acknowledge, that's what are condemning people today. The failure of transitional justice would still make us talk about the old regime versus the revolutionaries. The failure of the revolutionaries actually to come together and then have a clear project, also something that we are still paying its price. So that's for me my assessment wouldn't be yes, failed or not. I think still have a lot of opportunities to fix things. Did also the friends of Tunisia help it? I think people tried. There was a lot of good intentions, but also was not really like Tunisia received a lot of funding. US, if we talk about the US, as it's a call from POMED, and I had the opportunity to discuss this in DC when I was invited by POMED. I think managing better foreign aid for Tunisia would definitely help, because at a certain point, throwing money at Tunisia will not make the revolution successful. And for years, I would speak just about civil society, because there are still so many funding mechanisms, like the MCC is a big project, around $500 million that's going to be invested in Tunisia, but just the money coming for civil society. So I believe that if you just keep throwing money at problems, they won't be fixed, or they won't be self-fixed. And that's why, like, throwing money at civil society and saying, hey, when civil society has money, they can fix things. I'm not sure that's the right approach. So I think if we want to have a successful rest of the process, I think we should come together and discuss it. But I would still believe that it's 70% successful still. The economic challenges, they need to be addressed. But I think we're making baby steps towards success.
Thank you. A couple of you have talked about the issue of polarization and sort of the shift away, I think, from pluralism that we saw in the beginning, or the consensus-based kind of governance that we saw at the beginning, towards more polarization, towards more sort of people really feeling divided. And I wanted to first of all ask Saida, as someone in Parliament, do you see this? Do you think that there has been increased polarization, or do you think things are pretty much the same as they've been over the past couple of years, or past 5 or 6 years? And if there is more polarization, what can Parliament do to actually get around some of this, or to fix and sort of heal some of these divides?
I think that at the very moment we've been reaching the maximum of division, polarization, tension as well inside the political class, and this is especially notable in the Parliament, and the incapacity at the moment inside the parliament to build consensual decisions and to actually keep going in building, the institutions of Tunisia. Amna Guellali was saying something very interesting about the incapacity. Finally, it's something to say. It's like this. It's really the incapacity of the political class and the parliament to come out with this constitutional court, which is very much needed, and something which is, you can't really think that you have, guardians and limits to political power when you don't have, in the same time, this very core institution. But because of the polarization, because of the incapacity to build common decision, because of, we should say it's probably the end, the limits of consensus as a policy in Tunisia. We are being in a time where you can't, if not through votes, through really like the numerous kind of power that you have to go with a decision. Otherwise, you can't really take a decision. And this is really, not only sad, but it's quite dangerous because you have then institutions which are not able to work. And if we think about how the interior rules, for example, of the parliament, the constitutions in itself, a lot of mechanism into which actually shape the political spectrum, which actually shape, the political system in Tunisia, the institutional system definitely needs a consensus dialogue between different political families in order to come up with solutions, take decisions, take actions, and do something concrete for the country. So I think one of the consequences, this is an idea that I've been experimenting and thinking about and also writing about at the moment, which is that one of the consequences of the failure of transitional justice in Tunisia, because it is, we failed there, and it's important to say it. In 10 years after the revolution, the fact that the state in itself cannot say who's been a victim, who was not, the fact that the state was not able to provide to the justice sector all the means they needed to actually, come up with trials of people who've been accused of crimes before the revolution and even after the revolution, like thinking about that. Today, the fact that because of this failure, you have two main political actors who've been feeding on that, who become strong and important and influent, both into the parliament, but at the scale of the state, which is in one side the PDL, so Ounissi, and in the other side, Etilef al-Karama, is I think today one of the consequences of that, the fact that these people could nourish their speeches based on the failure of transitional justice. For some of them, the fact that revolution is still going on, and political parties who've been normalizing with the state, political parties who've been more thinking about their integration into the state, integration into the normal political spectrum in Tunisia, and are not revolutionary enough. And in the other side, people who would, make their better, as we say in French. It's a French expression that I've been translating now. I don't know what's the equivalent in English, but really, investing on the fact that the revolutionary moment was an error, was a mistake, and it was really better before the revolution, and working, investing on the nostalgia of the old regime, which is Abir Musi, and who are, like both sides of the spectrum, who today, I mean, I can't talk about that. I'm being, like, I'm a member of the parliament. I'm living with these people in a daily basis, and I'm saying that today, the fact that we can't really progress into finishing what the constitution was intending to do in terms of institutional reform, the fact that we are losing our time coming back to ideological debates, for example, the fact that we are, discussing if the revolution was or was not a mistake. I think that, yes, this very, very strong polarization today is harming definitely the process. So it's, I don't know, I still have high hopes. I think we have a national dialogue which is being prepared at the moment and being backed by the president of the Republic, Said. The whole process is supported by the UGTT, who, as a union, have proved before that they are capable of, uniting and bringing everybody around one table. So I still have high hopes in, having the political actors able to talk together and to come up to a solution together, because once again, because of the way decision making is shaped by the law, by the rules in Tunisia, you need the dialogue in order to take the decisions.
Thank you. There's two questions from the audience that kind of follow up on some of these points. And the first one is for Achraf, which is, could you further discuss the, quote, massive failure of transitional justice and the IVD? And then the second question, and I'll let you all sort of stew on this, think about it while Achraf answers, but is, do you think that the national dialogue proposed by the UGTT and President Said could break the current socio-political deadlock? How can you make the dialogue more inclusive of young and marginalized voices? So I'll let Achraf, if you want to answer both of those, if you want, and then I'll let Saida and Amna come in.
Sure thing. I would say the failure of the transitional justice is, first of all, the process itself. The process was not really the perfect process. There was so much debating happening around it. Was it inclusive? Was everyone given the right to speak, to give their version of the story? I think it was really, really an issue. I would just think of one thing, which is there is this international affair between Tunisia and the businessmen about the Tunisian French bank. And to be honest, the report of the IVD was a clear, unfounded accusation to the Tunisian state that would definitely serve the purpose of the businessmen against the state. So knowing a little bit about this topic, I think that the methodology used was not really scientific. The methodology that was used was not honest. After that, there was the big debate about the president of the IVD, the process. So in all this, I think we had an issue of, we lost the process. And I remember I was called by a friend of mine in the union of the Tunisian journalists about, shall we push for publishing the final report of IVD or not? I was one of really the terrible moments I've ever lived, because there's so many people who suffered in terms of human rights, so they deserve a recognition by the state. At the same time, if we, as a state, we acknowledge this process and we publish the report, this means we somehow pleaded guilty in another affair, which is this famous affair of the bank. So we were put in the situation when we needed to choose human rights and then supporting the victims, or just risking to lose a lot of billions for the bank. So that's why for me, this is the issue. The IVD and Saim Bisadrine were not the perfect people actually to lead on the process. It was very political. And then we found that we had Evide doing its job. At the same time, you found Bijaqai Sibsi, the previous president, trying to pass an amnesty law. And then every now and then, politicians, they trying to pass an amnesty law. And then even those who served in the old regime, a guy like Ben Ali, his son-in-law, Slim Shiboob, is now in jail. While Slim Shiboob was the very first businessman who went to Evide. So did it even serve him? Did the process help someone from the old regime start a new page? It did not. So I think we lost a lot of time, a lot of money, and then we did not turn the page. We did not know what's our history. We did not know what's going on. At the same time, even those from the old regime who believed in transitional justice, who believed in Evide, after all, it did not serve them. They are now in jail. Like someone like Ahmed Trabilsi is now in jail. He tried to reconcile with the state, but he couldn't find a way. So that's, for me, I think it's complicated as a process. It failed, and then like the idea of polarization, I think it doesn't exist. Just another argument that we use in the campaigning that we use before the election. That's it. Like if you see what polarization means, like we have old regime and let's say the revolutionaries. Now the last Secretary General of RCD serves now in the cabinet of Najd Ghannouchi. So for me, that polarization is just a fake argument that they just use during the elections. But it's one system, one regime that's been governing. I think those just changing the seats and that's it. But if you see Abir Musi, after all, she's, let's say, the only person from the old regime that decided to have its own political party and then go against the Islamists. But for the other old regime people, they serve with the revolutionaries. And for me, it's just an electoral argument, but on the ground, it doesn't change anything. For the last question concerning the dialogue, I think dialogue as a process is great, definitely. We remember that we won a Nobel Prize for it, for organizing a national dialogue. But at the same time, I think it's going to be, again, one more debate for a political class that has no solutions, that lacks the creativity to offer solutions for the country. So I was hearing someone from the opposition, actually, the vice president of the Democratic Bloc in the parliament, which is the main opposition now in the parliament. And he was talking about listening to youth is just a waste of time because there are no mechanisms to listen and discuss with youth, while the president actually is making it somehow important for this dialogue. If it's about to happen, it should necessarily include the youth. So you got the president who wants to include youth but has no clue how to do it. At the same time, you got people who are supposed to be in this dialogue who believe that discussing with youth is just a waste of time because there is no such a thing as youth and there are no mechanisms to discuss with them. So everyone is jumping really on the easy solutions, the easy options. And you already see the number of people that are asking that other groups, they don't participate in this dialogue. I think it's going to be the president and UGTT only, because you got the political parties, they have actually a full list of people they don't want to be around the same table with. So you want to have a dialogue with just very few people. So I hope it works, hope it's successful, but I'm not sure it's going to be inclusive. At a certain point, that it must go out of the official establishment, because when we talk about UGTT, it's still part of the establishment. It's part of what we know as the Tunisian establishment. So maybe finding new voices, different ways, thinking creatively outside of the box would be a way, but I'm not really optimistic. At the same time, I think it's not about dialogue. I think what we lack is a clear vision, where we want to go, real reforms. We want to be brave enough to fight the corruption of the people we are close to. That's only when we start the real reforms.
Thank you. And to you, Amna, what are your views on the dialogue, and are there ways to make it more inclusive or make it sort of outside of the establishment, as Achraf has mentioned?
Yeah, well, before going to the dialogue, I just wanted to disagree slightly with the assessment that Achraf gave about the transitional justice process, because I am from that part of civil society that really supported the process and believed that, you know, like even with all the shortcomings and all the flaws of such a process that are kind of natural in a system where you had to have some kind of consensus around the transitional justice process itself. We believe that it still had value. It's still recorded in a document that is really an important, you know, like historical document. What the kind of, you know, like violations and horrific things that happened on a large scale in Tunisia, that is really important to have as a record, as something that we can go back to, as something that will remind us of what the system of oppression was. And of course, like this incident or this case that Achraf is talking about is important, but cannot in and of itself, delete completely or cancel completely any value for the EVD's report. I think the problem with the transitional justice system or the transitional justice process, the failures were not the failures of the EVD by definition. It's not only the EVD. The EVD, of course, had some responsibility, but I think the more important, global aspect of the failure is really the lack of cooperation from the state, the fact that we had still inside the security services and at the helm of the state and at the helm of the Ministry of Interior, people who didn't want at all to have any, finding, any true unraveling of the system of oppression. I think what lacked for this transitional justice process to really go ahead was a real political will, and we are witnessing today, like the repercussion of that, because despite the fact that we had like this process where at least some part of the population believed in it, even if it was demonized since the beginning by mass media who are aligned with kind of, like some powerful political actors. It did have some, like buy-in, and a lot of people in Tunisia, I think, believed that the process should go ahead. But again, where we failed is the absence of constraints on the state to cooperate, to give the archives, to unveil the names of the people who were, involved in the killing or torture or forced disappearances or other mass violations, to force the state to cooperate with the different mechanisms. This is what happened with the EVD, and this is what is happening today with the specialized chambers who are being, completely, their work is being curtailed, and they are not able to do their work because of the lack of cooperation, because of the lack of political will to support their the justice that to make this system of transitional justice really happening on the ground. That's my view. So it's I really wanted to share it. And the second on the second question about the national dialogue, given the history of the past national dialogues and the fact that during a time of a total deadlock, with like after political assassinations, after the suspension of the parliament, we did believe in Tunisia that there is no hope unless we get together and have some kind of like dialogue. And I do believe that this national dialogue might have some positive outcome, although I'm a bit more doubtful today, given the context, given the fact that some political actors, some, for example, the PDL, are not participating in this political dialogue. I don't know what outcome it will have, and I'm not sure it will be as successful as the first one, because the context is also totally different. But I do hope that it will, succeed. I just wanted to answer a question that was directed to me, which is about the former regime, and like the fact that in other democracies they were kind of integrated in the process. And it's true that in Tunisia, like there was a kind of arrangement with the former, an arrangement, some kind of arrangement with the former regime since the beginning. I mean, in Tunisia, you have to remember that when Ben Ali left, the power was then devolved to people who are from the same system. So the head of the head of the constitutional
government.
Sorry?
Of the government. This is what you wanted.
No. I mean, people who were from the former regime were the ones who conducted the transition. That's the real, like oddity and real strange, like oddity, yes, of Tunisia's democratic process, is that people who were from the former regime were at the heart of the democratic process. They became the president of Tunisia. They became the first minister of Tunisia was the same as, like the from the former regime. So, and throughout the process of throughout the democratic process, we had people from the former regime. The problem in Tunisia is not the one of excluding totally former regime people or not. It's more about accountability. And it's more about like what kind of acceptable threshold of involvement in the horrific, like human rights record that we had in Tunisia. What kind of threshold is acceptable? Is it like people who have blood on their hands, people who were involved in, like the propaganda machine of Ben Ali? Are these acceptable people to, be then able to have a dialogue with? That's the question. In other democratic processes, there were also lustration laws, to exclude people from the former regime from taking, new important positions in the democratic system. There were laws that to prevent some of those who were really involved in human rights violations from taking part in the democratic system. So that's what we are grappling with in Tunisia, the fact that we didn't have such a process, we didn't have accountability to then start with a clean, like fresh slate, and that's different maybe from other, like societies where there was some kind of lustration and some kind of definition of what is acceptable to integrate inside the democratic system.
Thank you. I'll just say, sitting here in Washington, quite close to the Capitol, we're going through this process ourselves of what role our current president should have in the future. So we are blessed with many, many, many questions, but only 5 minutes left. So unfortunately, I apologize to all of the participants who asked questions that we're not going to get a chance to answer. I do want to ask one more question and give you all the chance to answer, and then you can maybe each take 2 minutes to answer, and then any final thoughts. And the question is, we talked a little bit about the concept of marginalization. I think Achraf mentioned this idea of two Tunisias. What do you think the role of decentralization it has been or can be in the future in sort of addressing the issues related to the transition, addressing some of the issues of marginalization that we have talked about so far? So I'll start with you, Saida, and if you could answer that question, but then also just any sort of final remarks you have, trying to keep it relatively short. Thank you.
All right. Yes, I think it's a fundamental question in the democratization of Tunisia. And when we were talking about the revolution, is also to include a new kind of people, new profiles, new type of political activists into the political system. And obviously to open up the door in front of young people and also women. I think the decentralization in that way was a great occasion to see coming in the political class again new people. But the thing is, like for exactly the same mechanism than at the transitional justice, and as I said in the very beginning of our panel, is if you don't give the means for that, if you don't invest in decentralization, if what you do is just to vote laws in the parliament to ensure local powers, but at the same time, you don't specify the relationship between local powers, central power, the role of the administration, if you don't invest there, if you don't actually give them their financial independence in order to take their very own decisions, actually they became the hostages of the central state. And in reality, concretely, we don't really see the change decentralization can give and the real impact on that, on the streets, on the way also the relationship between citizens and the state is actually shaped. So I think that we obviously we don't have a choice, we must continue into the process of decentralization, but 3 years after the first local elections, after the revolution, what we can say is mayors and the local political class has been investing as much time fighting really for their powers with the central state than working on concrete actual problems their cities are facing. They are doing themselves their own revolution in order to be taken seriously by the central administration and also all the types of local powers. And I'm thinking specifically here, the governorates, for example, and all this administration and appointed people, not elected people by the central state, who continue to, again, guarantee this hegemony. So definitely, if we want to see this democratization and this revolution 10 years after, growing and as Achraf said, it's a process, keep going, we definitely need to invest into the decentralization. Maybe my last thoughts is to say that I'm part of the generation who at that time was in their 20s, and today we are in our 30s and probably more mature, it's been a very interesting time. Most of my generation are still having high hopes into the future, despite of the very, the darkness of the situation, because we don't have another choice. Maybe we have also the possibility to look at other experiences. What's happening in the US, you must be, you must know that it is really having an impact on the fact that democracy is never something which is guaranteed. It's actually something you fight for. You always fight for.
Thank you so much. Achraf, I'll turn to you for your final thoughts.
I think for the Tunisian revolution, there's maybe a lack of vision what we want to achieve, because the notion of achieve goals, I don't recall there is a list of goals that we wrote down that we want to achieve. Definitely what I want to have is a country that's respectful to everyone, want to have a country that's prosperous. But at the same time, there is a lack of vision. I think Tunisia is like having Mosif Marzouki as a president, having Beji Qaid Sibsi as a president. I think we would have very different foreign policies but when the Gulf crisis happened, I think the actions of Tunisia with Beji Qaid Sibsi were something very different, I guess, if we had Mosif Marzouki as a president. So I think now we don't know who we are. We don't know who we are. Are we a communist country? Certain institutions are. Are we a neoliberal country? Certain institutions are. Are we conservatives? What are our standing ground in certain foreign issues? All these things, they keep on changing based on who's ruling the country. So for me, if there is a real dialogue that should take place in Tunisia, is definitely who we are or what we want to be as a country. And we keep postponing this, and then we start using it in polarization during campaign. Who's losing? It's, I think, the whole nation that's losing. We don't have a clear compass where we should be heading. We don't know our north, at least economically and politically. So that's, for me, like the things that we need to start discussing, because now this is a country with no vision. This is a country with no clear plan for the future. For the decentralization, I think it's something that the central organizations, they don't want it to succeed. There is a constitution that clearly states the need to go for decentralization, but at the same time, I think there are people are afraid to lose some of their power, and I see so many people trying to make this process a failure. So for me, I still perceive decentralization as a solution to so many problems, but at the same time, I think the process is not supported enough. That's why when people they talk about it, they only see negatives and bad things. But for me, it's just that this process is not finding the right support, not really funding, because I think the international community has been investing a lot in decentralization. It's just that there is no political will to make of this process a success. My final definitely thought would be good intentions are important, but having a clear plan with clear indicators is really what's missing. I hope more youth would go to, I won't say to politics, but would go to the public sphere in general, whether in civil society or joining political parties. But for me, I think those who will win the elections in 2024, they're still not aware of it. I'm sure they still don't know that they will be running for the elections in 2024. I'm pretty sure that there will be a lot of engineers and young people in 2022 that they will not accept this mediocrity to carry on, and they will be running. So for the future, I'm really optimistic, because 2024 will be a year to cut with all the bad practices, with patronage and all these things. And I'm pretty sure that the next generation of entrepreneurs, of politicians, of academia people will be just better.
Thank you. And the final word to Amna. Oops, you're still muted.
Yeah. Hi, thank you. Yeah, no, I think what Achraf said were very nice, like words to close this debate. But just to say that for me, what has been missing and what I think would be really important to get the transition on track again, or the democratic process on track again, is accountability and the end of impunity, I think. And when I'm saying impunity, I'm not only talking about human rights violations, I'm talking about impunity on all levels. Because in Tunisia, what is happening today is the fact that nobody is answering for his wrongdoings. You have a kind of, total disregard for the system in terms of having people answering for what they have been doing, like on all levels. You have an accident somewhere, you have people who have mismanaged public funds, or who have not handled in the way they should have been handling, like works, and people die out of that. Nobody answers for that. No, no real accountability is put in place. Again, not only on human rights violations, not on the political, like side of things, but normal, usual, accountability for having, caused mayhem, or for having caused, like the death of someone, or etc. And that's what is missing. I think this is linked also to the fact that we don't have a strong judicial system. We don't have real independence of the judiciary, despite all the kind of more of the cosmetic changes that have happened since the beginning of the democratic process, in terms of improving the independence of the judiciary, setting in place or putting in place institutions that would replace, like the kind of stranglehold that the executive branch had on the judicial system. But in reality, things have not really changed. And that is what is missing really also in Tunisia, is to have some kind of accountability before real, strong, independent judges who have all the responsibility and all the mandate to, like hold people accountable, and to then signal to the larger public, to the population, to the people who are in power, that there is no way to get. There is no possibility for people to get away from their responsibility. So that's one of the things I believe have been missing and should be addressed if we want to move ahead with a system that is on track when it comes to the democratic process.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the panelists. This has been a really, really great discussion. And again, I apologize to all the people who had questions we didn't get a chance to answer, but I hope that we will be able to have more follow-on discussions. And now I am incredibly excited to share with you a video that my colleague Nesreen Mubarak and I, along with Carnegie's amazing digital content director, Cameron Zotter, put together to get at some of the same issues that we're talking about today. And this is a compilation of the thoughts and analysis of around 20 different Tunisian activists and analysts from across the country, representing different age groups and different political views. This is the premiere of this video. This is the first time that we are showing it to anyone, but it will be available after this session on the Carnegie Tunisia Monitor website. And I really encourage you all to share it with your networks, and I hope that you enjoy it.
أنا عايشت ثورة يوم 17 ديسمبر 2010. كنت أنا ذاك أدرس بالمعهد العالي لدراسات التكنولوجيا بسيدي بوزيد، ووصلت إلى مكان الحادثة بعد 10 دقائق فقط من حادثة حرق البوازيزي لنفسه. كانت هناك صدمة شعبية كبيرة والناس كانوا مستغربين مما حدث. الأمور في مساء ذلك اليوم تطورت إلى تجمع بعض أهالي عائلة البوازيزي مع بعض الناشطين المدنيين والسياسيين المعارضين آنذاك، وتجمعوا حول الولاية، وكانت هناك يعني تجمع كبير. ثم تطورت الأمور من اليوم الموالي إلى بعض المواجهات والاحتجاجات، ثم مواجهات مع الأمن، ثم انتشرت الأمور من سيدي بوزيد إلى القصرين إلى الولايات الأخرى إلى أن شملت كافة الولايات.
So, and they organized with other people solidarity with Sidi Bouzid in the beginning and with other regions later on, and we organized the strike in Kairouan.
وأذكر أن أكبر مسيرة جابت شوارع مدينة جندوبة، حيث التحمت الجماهير الطلابية بالجماهير الشعبية وشلت جميع الأنشطة بالمدينة ليفتح باب الفوضى وأحداث الشغب التي طالت الملك العام والملك الخاص وملاحقة رموز النظام السابق.
الثورة بدأت قبل يمكن تقريبا ب3 أسابيع أو 4 أسابيع، بدأت في مناطق داخلية من تونس، ومن بعد طلعت شيئا فشيئا إلى المدن، ثم خلطت لتونس، ثم خلطت إلى قلب العاصمة إلى شارع الحبيب بورقيبة. 14 جانفي عشرات الآلاف مشاو قدام الداخلية، وزارة الداخلية يندوا بالنظام، يندوا يطالبوا برحيل النظام وبإرساء حاجة جديدة.
We went back to Tunis with my friend, the late amazing, brave activist Lina Ben Mehni, and we took part of the first demonstrations that finally arrived to the capital, Tunis. And I remember having felt a sense of, I was scared, of course, and the police, they were very aggressive and they were very angry. But I felt like they were more tense than ever, and I felt that there was something strong growing, and there was a big wave coming with no return to the way things were before.
So we went out to protest on that day, on the 14th of January, and for many of us out there, it was the very first time that we saw that. What I saw that day and what I felt through this amazing feeling of unity and of solidarity in this massive crowd is something that I have never seen before. It was something wonderful and unique, and I am so glad that I took part in that, at least on that day.
الناس قبل 2011 كانت ما تنجمش حتى تتكلم، كانت تعمل اوتو سونسور الروح. وقت اللي انت تعمل اوتو سونسور لروحك ما عادش تنجم حتى تكريتيكي ولا تنقد اي حاجه قدامك من الخوف. الخوف يقتل عقل الانسان. دونك وقت اللي تطيح حاجز الخوف، وقت اللي الناس تولي قادره انها تتكلم بحريه كيما جاي معناتها كيما بالفوضى اللي صارت من بعد 2011 صارت ثوره ديجا في مخاخ العباد. هذه الحاجه الاولى. الحاجه الثانيه علاش نقولوا صارت ثوره؟ خاطر العباد اللي كانت في الحبس ولات هي في الحكم. دونك البيراميد كامله نتاع الحكم او نيفو انستيتيونيل تبدلت. الحاجه الثالثه عملنا حاجه كبيره برشا، ان هي وبرشا عباد قالوا خسرنا معناتها فلوس مطيشه وغاسبياج دارجون، اللي هي الدستور نتاعنا. الدستور اللي خذا 3 سنين والناس تناقشت فيه. النقاش اللي صار هذاك بالبلبيز نتاعو بالعرك بالهمجيه اللي صارت كلها، الناس ولات عندها الحق تتكلم. دونك فما تمثيليه، فما شرعيه قاعده تتجسد يوما بعد يوم.
Now, in terms of freedoms, the constitution is very progressive and very liberal, and I think we have the most advanced rights in the region and probably among the most advanced countries in the world in terms of what is written in the constitution. But in terms of how this constitution is applied on the ground, how laws have been or not changed to reflect these beautiful values of equality, of freedom of expression, of freedom of assembly, freedom of initiative, I don't think we're there yet.
But when it comes to women participation in the civil society, in the mass movement, I think they did an amazing job, and they are doing an amazing job, and clearly they are really running the show. Another major achievement, I believe, it's the rise of the LGBTQA movement. It is extremely important movement in a conservative society that is really pushing the conversation on individual freedoms, but also it is a movement that it is not only interested in single issue politics, but it is interested in the wider structure, teaming up with other movements against all forms of oppression.
We've been successful in avoiding bloodshed, avoiding civil war, avoiding radical attitude towards each other in our societies.
جيل جديد اكتسح الساحة العامة. كي نحكي على الساحة العامة نحكي على الساحة الفنية، نحكي على الساحة السياسية، ساحة المجتمع المدني، معناتها في جميع المحاور نوعا ما.
الناس هذوما في البلدان اللي صاروا فيهم ثورات الكل ثم جيل جديد هو اللي يبني البلاد. بعد ما تصير ثورة يخمم في تصور جديد للبلاد وياخذ مقاليد السلطة.
This anniversary is unfortunately a grim reminder that the socioeconomic conditions that prompted the revolution remain unresolved. And these would be regional inequalities between northern and coastal regions and interior regions, neoliberal economic restructuring, and the unbroken rule of the old political and business classes. These issues have actually intensified in the past 10 years, placing the country on the way of a crisis worse than the conditions of 2011.
When you talk to people, you feel that there is a big discontent and there is a lot of anger. And of course, in this kind of situation, the first thing that comes to mind is that all this is due to democracy. And so you have a lot of people who are openly praising dictatorship, and I think this is very dangerous for the future of democracy in this country. It is something that, the risk of going back to dictatorship is always around, not necessarily going back to the Ben Ali regime, but going back to some sort of authoritarian regime. The risk is always there because people are not happy.
حتى احنا تو نقولوا حققت اهدافها بارابور شنو؟ كانوا بارابور لو شونجمون بوليتيك، معناها مساله النظام السياسي في حد ذاته. وفان دو كونت اون ني افيك ان ريجيم بوليتيك كي بلو بروبليماتيك كو لونسيان. Et ça, c'est le résultat en fait, c'est un résultat. كانوا au niveau économique et social. Alors là, c'est le comble. Allez, c'est le comble parce que généralement, l'agenda priorisé durant les révolutions, c'est pas l'agenda économique et social, malheureusement. C'est l'agenda politique, c'est l'agenda sécuritaire. De manière générale. Et c'est le cas de la Tunisie qui n'a pas échappé à cette règle déjà.
Les plus défavorisés dans la société tunisienne aujourd'hui qui nous le rappellent, à négliger justement les objectifs économiques de cette révolution qui sont justement la dignité, la réduction du taux de chômage, de pouvoir de mieux vivre, d'abaisser les taux de corruption. Malheureusement, avec la démocratie, on a aussi vu démocratisation de la corruption. À un moment donné, elle était centralisée sur une classe sociale et peut-être sur certaines familles. Aujourd'hui, ça s'est démocratisé. On a la corruption qui est malheureusement à tous les niveaux.
If we fail to fix the economy, to stimulate the investment, to lower the unemployment, to improve people's life, then we may be in a position where many people will question what did the revolution bring to them and what did democracy bring to them. And this may lead us in a dangerous path of the emergence of populist currents and even fascist movements.
I don't think Tunisia is headed in the right direction today with those who are in the government or in the parliament. But in order to save what we can save, those who will come after will need to restore hope. We have survived the Bourguiba and the Ben Ali eras because we had hope in our country and trust in ourselves. Now everything is filled with doubt.
ماذا تحتاج تونس؟ تونس تحتاج إلى نخبة سياسية أكثر إدراكاً للواقع وقادرة على صياغة برنامج اقتصادي واجتماعي واضح، منوال تنموي واضح مخالف للمنوال التنموي الذي كان سائداً منذ الاستقلال.
استكمال أهداف الثورة يجب من تحقيق منوال تنموي يكون عادل يضمن الحقوق للمواطنين والمواطنات التونسيين، كيف الخلق نسيج اقتصادي يكون قادر على تحقيق مواطن شغل للشباب الذي يعاني من البطالة.
Moi je pense que nous sommes sur le bon chemin. Il reste à faire c'est d'avoir une stabilité politique qui permettra à réaliser des réformes, à répondre aux attentes des jeunes et de la population d'une manière générale. C'est pas difficile, mais il faut une certaine stabilité, il faut une certaine vision, il faut qu'il y ait un meilleur dialogue, une meilleure écoute des uns et des autres.
ويظهر لي اليوم باش تنجح تونس على خاطر المجتمع المدني باش يولي قوي،
ويظل القطاع هذاك الثالث مع الوقت باش يلقى بقعته خير ويدافع على مصالح العامة مش المصالح الخاصة اللي نشوفوها برشا في السياسيين اليوم.
We need to stay together because I still believe that the only powerful way to gain our country back and to achieve a real successful democracy is through people's voice. To me, it's the only path to destroy tyranny. It's the only path to destroy oppression and servitude.
إنه الخلاص نجم يكون كان من الفرد ولكن وقبل كل شيء من المجموعة. وفي الآخر نحب نقول الشعب التونسي يحيى الشعب التونسي العظيم عندما يريد أن يكون عظيما.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Hawthorne, the Deputy Director for Research at POMED, and I really enjoyed watching that film from Carnegie. So much food for thought, so many great Tunisian voices there. So thank you, Sarah and Nesreen, for that great effort. Very pleased today to begin a conversation with Ambassador Gordon Gray. Gordon is currently the Chief Operating Officer at the Center for American Progress. But before that, he had a distinguished 35-year career in the US government as a US diplomat. And one of the most notable parts of his very distinguished career was serving as the US ambassador to Tunisia from 2009 until 2012, witnessing the start of the Arab Spring and directing the US response in support of Tunisia's democratic transition. So I'm pleased to have the chance to talk with Gordon for about 30 minutes or so, and looking back at what happened 10 years ago as he saw it, and then looking a little bit at where Tunisia is today. So Gordon, let me go ahead and start by asking, how did the US Embassy in Tunis, in the months leading up to the beginning of the revolution in December 2010, how did the embassy see the situation in Tunisia at that time? And what signs did you see then that discontent was growing? And in hindsight, what signs did you miss that this momentous change was coming?
Thanks, Amy, and thanks to you and Sarah for inviting me to participate in this great program this morning as we celebrate the accomplishments of the Tunisians just not only 10 years ago today, but also in the decades since. There were a number of signs of discontent that I would say even predated 2010. I'm thinking specifically of the labor unrest in Gafsa in 2008, which the government was successful in putting down. And then in October 2009, when Ben Ali was re-elected, and I say that in quotation marks, for another 5-year term. And that there was a lot of discussion following his election about whether he was positioning, some people thought he was positioning his wife to succeed him. We found that pretty unlikely given her lack of political abilities, shall we say. There was talk of his son-in-law, Sakhar al-Matri, who was elected to parliament, and that was a more realistic scenario. And there was a real sense in 2010 of discontent growing, and there was also almost a sense of the fin de regime sense, but that I also don't want to exaggerate it and suggest that when we were looking at things in 2010, we thought, Ben Ali is going to be out of here before before January 2011 ends, because it certainly wasn't like that. And that kind of ties in, what are the signs that we missed? I would say it was more timing than discontent. And I'm not sure anyone really saw the signs of how quickly it would happen, maybe more to the point, how brittle the regime was.
Thank you, Gordon. And just to follow up on your remarks, one development that a lot of Tunisians have talked about as kind of contributing to the growing discontent and momentum for change in the fall or December 2010 was the leak of WikiLeaks cables. And I'd like to ask you if you're able to say, did the embassy at that time perceive that was a factor within Tunisian political society? Were people discussing that, what they were reading, and kind of getting these senses of new information about their dictator Ben Ali? What do you remember at that time specifically regarding that issue, or were people too nervous to talk about it with you?
Some people were too nervous to talk to us about it. Some of the people who had been embassy sources for information and cables that were stolen and released told us, we can't, you've burned us. I mean, not us personally, but the US government has burned us, and it's just nothing personal, but we need to step back and we can't associate with you. My view has always been that the WikiLeaks explanation is a little too American-centric, and I think it's a little patronizing vis-a-vis the Tunisians. Tunisians didn't need a foreign embassy to tell them that Ben Ali was corrupt, that contracts were getting steered to his family, that Ahmed Trabelsi was elected mayor of La Goulette based on his family ties rather than on any intrinsic political. They didn't need us to tell them. So I've never really liked that explanation myself.
And speaking of Ben Ali dictatorship, I mean, can you tell us a little bit about what it was like to work as the US ambassador under the Ben Ali dictatorship? I think a lot of people who don't know Tunisia and didn't know Tunisia then at that time aren't aware of really how extremely repressive and closed Tunisia was. There was actually, in my opinion, as an outsider, a little more political openness, relatively speaking, in Egypt at the time, more than there was in Tunisia. It was so repressive. What was it like working as the US ambassador in that kind of, in the old Tunisia?
First, before answering your question, I agree with you completely that at that time that I was in Tunisia, 2009 to 2012, there was more political openness, however imperfect it was, obviously, in Egypt than there was in Tunisia. I had served in Cairo, as had a number of my colleagues at the embassy in Tunis from 2002 to 2005. So coming from Egypt, I mean, even if it was a 4-year interlude, it was very frustrating working in Tunisia. The government did not want to engage with us. It wasn't just the U.S. It was any foreign embassy. But worse, they really discouraged Tunisians, be they private individuals or civil society, from engaging with us. And I'll give you one anecdote to illustrate that, if I may. I paid, shortly after I got to Tunisia, I took a trip to Sfax to see Sfax, show the flag, meet people there. embassy set up a lunch with really pretty establishment characters, university president, member of parliament, people like that, maybe 6. One person showed up. The only person who showed up was the representative of the university president. Everyone else had gotten the word from the governor. They got a phone call an hour before saying, don't go to this, don't go to this lunch. I had a dinner that night with a businessman, again, very establishment, who had been told by the governor to not to hold the dinner, but he was said, forget that, held it. One of the guests at the dinner ran an English language institute. So since my schedule for the next day had been canceled by the governor, she asked me if I wanted to visit. I said, sure. I taught English as Peace Corps volunteer in Morocco, so I was quite interested. Went to the English Language Institute, was there maybe 45 minutes, saw a few classes. She was pulled into the Ministry of Interior twice to ask what happened during that visit. So that just gives, I mean, I don't think for any Tunisians in the audience, this will come as a surprise at all, but just to give people who aren't familiar with what it was like being in Tunisia, for Tunisians, not just for foreign diplomats.
Yeah, thank you. Next, I wanted to ask, kind of tell us, if you could tell us your memories about January 14th, 10 years ago today, and the days leading up to that, and how much of a window did you actually have into what was going on inside the regime, and when was it clear to you that things might kind of be shifting really in a major way? And what messages was the U.S. sending the Tunisian government at that time?
I think the first, I mean, obviously we heard about Mohamed Bouazizi's self-immolation and the protests that followed. One of the first signs was when on December 28th, 2010, Ben Ali visited Bouazizi in the hospital. And there's the very famous photograph of Bouazizi wrapped head to toe in bandages from his injuries, and Ben Ali visiting him. And that was the idea that the king was visiting a subject was very much unlike Ben Ali. And that was, to us, the first indication that the regime felt it was in trouble. That same night, Ben Ali gave his first of 3 speeches in which he, promised to look at the economic problems and said it was all this trouble was due to foreign forces, the usual. And then he had the cabinet, they replaced 4 ministers the next day. So that was one of the first signs that the regime felt that it was that it was in trouble. And as far as what our messages were to the Tunisian government in as the demonstrations intensified in January, we strongly advised them to avoid violence, which unfortunately they did not do. And we did that both publicly and privately, and both in Washington and in Tunisia. But it was just antithetical to the way the Ben Ali regime, antithetical to its DNA. And I think that's probably common to most authoritarian regimes.
And what was it like watching, as an American diplomat, what was it like watching the Ben Ali regime crumble? I think many of our viewers, obviously our Tunisian viewers, lived through that. But for those who have not been in an authoritarian country in the moment that the dictatorship fell, as a foreigner, what was it like watching the regime crumble? And it crumbled pretty fast.
It crumbled very quickly. You're right. Frankly, it was inspirational, and one of the memories that sticks out in my mind is that we held a town hall meeting at the embassy for our Tunisian employees. I think it was around 11 o'clock on Friday, January 14th, not knowing that there was a tremendously large demonstration downtown, but not knowing what that later that day, Ben Ali would be on a plane to Jeddah. And it was the first time that the Tunisian employees felt they could speak frankly among one another, and it's something they acknowledged at the town hall meeting. And just hearing them speak and hearing their stories and their sentiments about what they saw happening was it was really a touching moment. I think shortly after Ben Ali fled, and talking to Tunisian contacts and Tunisian friends, I was struck by how many people said, it's the first time I really spoke to my neighbors. It was the first time I got to know them, particularly in Tunis, but elsewhere as well. You'll recall the security situation was a bit tenuous because the interior security forces faded into woodwork, which was a smart move on their part. But before the army came in to establish order, there were a lot of what we would call in the States neighborhood watch organizations set up, and it really created a sense of civic pride that Tunisians told me they never felt they completely enjoyed before. So it was all, just on a personal level, it was very, very inspiring.
Were you surprised at kind of how quickly the regime crumbled? I mean, many outsiders, including myself, who was watching Tunisia from afar before, during the dictatorship, did not think that his regime would kind of disintegrate so quickly, or at least disintegrate in a formal sense so quickly. It looked pretty solid. Of course, it wasn't. But were you and your colleagues surprised by kind of the speed of events on January 14th and afterwards, soon after?
Yes, we were surprised. I think it's fair to say everyone was surprised, and certainly if looking at what happened further east in other countries, Tunisia was the exception in that regard, and is for all the criticism that Ben Ali richly deserves. To be fair, he left his country when he did, and the result was much less bloodshed than we saw in Libya, or that we're seeing in Syria or wherever.
I'd like to shift gears a little bit and ask you, in your view, what do you think that the United States got right in its immediate response to Tunisia's revolution, the time when you were there as the ambassador? And also, how do you think the U.S. fell short or has fallen short in its support for Tunisian democratization?
I think that the U.S., both the executive and the legislative branches, were quick to realize the magnitude and importance of what had happened in Tunisia, and were quick to offer both rhetorical support and some initial economic support. The rhetorical support, probably the most important, came on January 25th, 11 days after the revolution, when during the State of the Union address, President Obama said, the American people stand with the Tunisians and their aspirations for democracy. That might not seem too momentous to American ears, but Tunisians, from ministers to average citizens, told me in virtually the exact same words that brought tears to my eyes. And hearing President Obama say that, and seeing the visual of both Democrats and Republicans, senators and Congress people rising to their feet to give a standing ovation to that line, really resonated with the Tunisian people. Of course, words are cheap, and you have to put your money where your mouth is. And I think that the U.S. government came up with some good programs to help ease the transition. One of the milestones was President Obama's invitation to then Prime Minister Beji Caid-Essebsi to visit the Oval Office on October 7th of 2011. That led to a number of agreements and such as more educational scholarships, sovereign loan guarantees to help boost the financial stability of the Tunisian government, money for the Overseas Private Investment Corporation for franchises in Tunisia, Peace Corps, things like that. So I think the short-term response was good. I think in the longer term, the United States has done, in other words, longer term meaning over the past 10 years, but more recently than when I was there, has done an excellent job in providing security assistance. And I think that's helped a great deal with the security situation in Tunisia. I would have liked to have seen a more sustained effort by the US government on trying to encourage US investment in Tunisia. When we were there, we advocated strongly but unsuccessfully that the US initiate discussions with the government of Tunisia on a free trade agreement. Not so much as because we thought it would have great economic results or commercial results overnight, but because we thought doing so would be an important signal of confidence for foreign investors, not just for US investors. So I think we did very well on the political side. I think we did well in the short term. I think we did well in security assistance. I would have liked to have seen us do more, and would still like to see us do more on trade and job creation, because the jobs are, employment is such an important, unemployment was a catalyst of the revolution, and it's really central to the transition succeeding.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I feel that there's a lot more that the U.S. could have done and should be doing now. And so we have a lot of room for improvement.
Yes.
But
one thing that's heartening is that even though the Trump administration each year tried to cut back on the assistance for Tunisia, Congress reinstated it. So I think there's strong bipartisan support for Tunisia, which gives me some hope.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. There is there is strong bipartisan support in Washington on the Hill for Tunisia. I also think that the U.S., it's easy to sort of forget that after the U.S. pivoted very quickly to basically, supporting an authoritarian regime or not challenging an authoritarian regime, not really challenging the Ben Ali dictatorship in any significant way. But when the change happened, the United States pivoted immediately and basically welcomed what was happening in Tunisia. And, I think it's easy to kind of take that for granted, but I think that was very important that from the beginning, the United States government sort of immediately made clear that it welcomed democratic transition in Tunisia, and in my opinion, gave a lot of really important signs to start making that policy a reality. So let's hope for increased support and good and smart support for Tunisia
definitely
in the coming period. Just in closing, I'd like to ask you, in your career in the State Department as a U.S. diplomat, you served in numerous Arab countries, and I'd like to ask you to reflect a little bit. What did you find, or what do you find different about Tunisia that might explain why it was the first country in the region to succeed in having such a revolution to oust its dictator? And why do you think that despite all the challenges and problems today that we've heard about from our Tunisian colleagues throughout this event, why do you think that Tunisia has been able to make really more progress, democratic process by far than any other place in the region?
I think a number of factors came together from Tunisia's history. It had a fairly rich tradition of reforms. I mean, Tunisia outlawed slavery before the United States did, for example, but also more recent reforms in the 20th century. Women have greater rights than in other countries in the region. I always like to point out that the Tunisian women got the vote before Swiss women did, for example, but that's just one example of the rights. Fairly educated population, a population that has a lot of exposure to democratic norms. French media is a big influence. I think it's important that a lot of if one contrasts situation in Tunisia with, say, the situation in Egypt, the opposition leaders in Tunisia were in exile, didn't go underground. They were in exile in countries with democratic traditions. So you had Rashid Ghannouchi in London, Marzouki in Paris, Hamid Jebali for a while in Spain, and I think that's important as well. It's a fairly homogeneous society. It's and compromise is part of the nature of the society, and so I think all of those were reasons that the transition, the political transition, succeeded, and I think it's why Tunisia's come as far as it has in the past decade. And unfortunately, when those factors are missing elsewhere, it's why perhaps other countries haven't progressed as much.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador Gordon Gray, for being with us today to mark this important occasion in Tunisia. And on behalf of POMED and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, thanks to all of our viewers for being with us today, especially our colleagues and friends in Tunisia. We celebrate and recognize all of your achievements, and we are in solidarity with you as supporters of democracy in the United States, Tunisia, and all around the world. We are in solidarity with you as you continue on your journey to making your society more just and more free for all Tunisians. So thank you everyone for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you at another event soon.
Thanks, Amy.